And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to...
So this is teaching for women. So the only thing that was done away with was the sacrificial law, but the prophets told us, and the testimony of the Son, which the Son tells you to go read 3 times in the New Testament, was that Yeshua would bring them back to the covenants at Horeb, the 10 Commandments. He tells you to go read that in John 5, verse 37 through 47. If you don't believe Moses' writings, you won't believe his words. He says, search the scriptures, for in them you'll find your eternal salvation. It was what was testified of him. He tells you again in Luke 16 the story of Lazarus and the rich man burning in hell, begging Abraham to send Lazarus to his brother so they don't burn in hell with him. And he says he has Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. He says, well, if you send one from the dead that rose from the dead, they'll hear him. And he says if they don't believe and hear Moses and the prophets, they won't believe the one who rose from the dead, Yeshua. He tells you again in Luke 24, he tells the disciples, there's fools and slow of heart for not believing in all what the prophets said. And then he proceeds to tell them what Moses and the prophets wrote of him. In 1 John 5, verse 9 through 13, Jehovah says, if you do not believe the record and testimony he gave of his Son, you make him a liar and you won't have the Son. Moses wrote the testimony in Deuteronomy 18, verse 15 through 19, that Jehovah would rise Yeshua up from amongst the people. The people were to hearken, that means listen and obey, according to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Horeb in the day of the assembly. Deuteronomy 5, saying, let me not hear this great voice anymore, that Jehovah's voice anymore, that we die not. And the people will have spoken which they had spoken, quoting verbatim Deuteronomy 5. And Jehovah proceeds to tell you he'll send his Son in my name, the testimony, he'll send him in my name, Jehovah's name, what he said, which is Yeshua or Yahushua, because the prophets told us, and Yeshua also told us in John 5, 42 and 43, that they would change his name, that you'll receive another Messiah who would come in his own name if you don't have the love of God in you, which is an idiom. 1 John 5, 3, the love of God is keeping the commandments. What was desired at Horeb, the covenant, the holy covenant that's eternal, and the day of the assembly. So he would put his words in Deuteronomy 18 in his Son's mouth, Jehovah, and he would give the people commands that he will require of them. Peter in Acts 3 tells you the same thing. Verse 18 through the end of the chapter. It quotes verbatim Deuteronomy 18, and he says, whoever doesn't listen to Yeshua, Jehovah would destroy from among the people. So he's not just going to require you to keep the 10 commandments. He's going to destroy those who don't keep the commandments of God. Jehovah tells you what his judgment is from the beginning to the end. He doesn't change. That's why Malachi 3 says that Jehovah doesn't change. Yeshua didn't change yesterday, today, or forever. He came to fulfill what the prophets wrote of him. And Matthew 22, verse 36 through 40, he gave his Father's commandments to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. He quoted verbatim Deuteronomy chapter 6 right after they got the holy covenants at Horeb in the day of the assembly. In Deuteronomy 5, he quoted verse 5, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. The first commandment with promise in Ephesians 6, 1 through 4. To honor your father and your mother is Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's to bring your children up in the Lord so they don't suffer the wrath of God, because Ephesians 5 tells you the wrath of God is appointed to the children of disobedience. So you should read Deuteronomy chapter 4 through 10, because it will tell you that they received the holy covenants with Jehovah's voice first. And he did that. He spoke to them at Horeb so they would learn to fear him, because to fear God means to keep his commandments as well. Deuteronomy 5 says, oh, if they would have a heart in them to fear me always and keep my commandments always, so it will go well with them. He tells you that several times through those chapters, but it will tell you that they would transgress after receiving the holy covenants when Moses went up on the mountain, because when he spoke to them, they did fear him. They didn't want to hear his voice anymore, that they die not. So they asked Moses to be their mediators, to go hear what the Lord would say, and they would do it. So the people all spoken which they had spoken, Deuteronomy 5. So Moses went up on the mountain to receive the covenants, the verbal contract they just agreed to at Horeb. And then they transgressed with the golden calf, breaking the holy covenants. And then they were given the punishment of the sacrificial law. Deuteronomy 31:24 tells you that Moses wrote the sacrificial law, the 600 laws, in a book, the handwriting of ordinance, in Colossians 2:14 that was nailed to the stake, not the holy covenants. And it was there as a witness against the people until it would be finished. That's Deuteronomy 31:24. So it was only there until it would be finished, Galatians 3:19, until Yeshua would come to fulfill what the prophets wrote, that he would bring them back to the covenants at Horeb, everything desired at Horeb in the day of the assembly, the testimony. And those that keep the commandments of God and teach their neighbor to keep the commandments of God, because his second commandment in Matthew 22 is to love your neighbor as yourself, which is Leviticus 19:15-18. It's to do righteous judgment, judged by the righteousness of God, which is the 10 Commandments, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 25, and Psalms 119, verse 172, and all of his commandments are righteousness, what he established from the beginning. So Leviticus 19, to love your neighbors, to do righteous judgment, to rebuke them of their sins so they don't suffer sin upon them. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Those who have the Spirit in John 14, because the Messiah tells you 3 times in John 14 how you'll receive the Spirit of truth and how he will abide with you, so you have the Son for eternal life in First John 5, verse 9-13. You got to love him and keep his commandments. So you got to love God, keep the 10 commandments, and love your neighbor by rebuking sin, doing righteous judgment. He'll send you the Spirit of truth that the world can't receive because it's casted off his commandments, says that it's filthy. It's they refer to 2 Corinthians 3, saying that's talking about the Holy Covenant, when it's talking about the sacrificial law that Joshua was instructed to copy on stone, in Deuteronomy 27 and Joshua chapter 8, verse 30-35. The law and sin and death you shouldn't live by. So those who keep the commandments and teach others in Matthew 5 will be great in the kingdom of heaven, because he didn't come to destroy the law of the prophets, because Deuteronomy 18, then in the chapter, whatever prophet spoke in Jehovah's name, if it didn't come to pass, you shouldn't fear him. He would be a false prophet. And if he didn't give them the covenants at Horeb, he would have destroyed Moses. And like 1 John 5, verse 9-13, you would make Jehovah a liar, because that was the testimony he gave of his son. So yes, the saints, the 144,000, have the Father's name, Jehovah, on their foreheads and keep the commandments of God. They fear God. They keep his commandments. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to keep the commandments and teach your neighbor to keep the commandments, do righteous judgments. And then his Spirit of truth will abide with you and teach you all things, prophecy, so you can be a watchman, Ezekiel 2:3-33, and blow the trumpets. Warn the people.